When I picked up the Intel DX79SR board from eBay, I needed some way to test it. I searched eBay high and low for the cheapest 2011 V1 CPU and came across a Xeon known as the E52603. It actually wasn't $3 originally, but I put in an offer for that and the seller accepted. Unfortunately, right after I made that purchase, another listing appeared for a Xeon E52620, which had better specs, like really acceptable specs for the price, and probably could have offered the same that I did for the 2603. Nonetheless, I've had to use the CPU until I could afford an actual one, so let's see what it feels like using a $3 CPU in 2019. Based on the 32nm Sandy Bridge architecture, the E52603 is a quad-core chip with no hyperthreading. Below average would be an understatement when it comes to the 1.8 GHz clock speed, which wouldn't be as painful if it had turbo capability, which it does not. All of this will consume about 80 watts of power, which is crazy considering the type of performance that Intel, and more impressively, AMD can cram far below that 80 watt TDP. For benchmarks, I'll be testing CSGO, Fortnite, Rocket League, Cities Skylines, and Dota 2, along with some synthetic benchmarks. As for the rest of the system, I have 16GB of 1866MHz DDR3 in quad channel, and a GTX 950 from Zotac, which should run all these games with no trouble. Starting off in CSGO with the settings maxed out, the 950 achieved an average of 68 FPS, a maximum of 140 FPS, 1% low of 12.4 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 3.5 FPS. In Fortnite, the game automatically set the 950 to high settings. Granted, my monitor is 1440 by 900, but still, the 950 might not be a bad choice for a low-end or mid-range 1080p gaming PC. Anyways, got an average of 53.91 FPS, a max of 96.2 FPS, a 1% low of 1.5 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 1.5 FPS. Moving on to Dota 2, this is more of a CPU-intensive game that I'm not very good at, but skilled or not, the game ran pretty smooth with minimal stutter. It averaged 62.8 FPS, maxed out at 107.4 FPS, got a 1% low of 30.4 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 13.2 FPS. In Rocket League, the experience was also very enjoyable. This is another esports title that's easy to run even if the CPU is slow. It achieved an average of 60.9 FPS, a max of 63.1 FPS, a 1% low of 13.2 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 0.3 FPS. I suppose that I won't be benchmarking City Skylines today because unfortunately my city got lost, or maybe the game updated, because all of my saves are gone, so I guess I'll never know if it can run around this CPU. Anyways, moving on to some synthetic benchmarks. In Cinebench R20, 2603 got a very impressive score of 488. As well as the CPU is, the score would have been better if the cores were clocked higher. In 3D Mark Skydiver, the system got a combined score of 11,290, the CPU scored 3,650. In Firestrike, it got a combined score of 2,179, and a CPU score of 3,133. Finally, in Time Spy, it got a combined score of 1,764 and a CPU score of 1,321. In Superposition Benchmark, using the Medium preset, it got a score of 4,017. And finally, in Heaven Benchmark, again with the Medium preset, it got a score of 2,199. Now, while there isn't as much of an extreme bottleneck with the 950, when I tried playing Fortnite, for example, with the 780 Ti, the card can run the game at maximum settings with 60 plus FPS, no problem. But since the 780 Ti is around the same or better performance than a 1060, the CPU is just too slow. You'd be surprised, but using the CPU for browsing the web is surprisingly usable. There's usually always something that an older x86-based CPU will still be able to do in the present. Watching 1080p or 1440p video on YouTube is no problem, though that's also thanks to the quad-channel 16GB of RAM feeding Chrome nicely. Editing thumbnails on Pixlr is fine, and even editing my videos, which I've been doing since the Dell video by the way, has been shockingly smooth. Of course my videos are a whole lot less complex than anything else I've ever made, but I guess that the slow frequency really isn't hurting much. I don't preview at full resolution, maybe half, but still very impressive to say the very least. Render times though are where it isn't very strong. The single-threaded performance is pretty mediocre considering this is a 32nm chip. I don't think it does outperform my 2200G, but I usually forget about how long it takes to render anyways. So the only question is, can you use a 1.8 GHz $3 CPU in 2019? Well, technically, yes, if you have a more entry-level graphics card or just do basic tasks like checking email, video streaming, and office work, It isn't really all that bad, but that doesn't mean you should go out of your way to do so. 80-watt TDPs and 4 cores do not go together in 2019. Not only are CPUs more power efficient, but even mobile processors are not only faster than 1.8 GHz, but faster than 3 GHz, which even then that isn't really something crazy for a desktop. For a laptop, I guess you should give it a pat on the back. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you did enjoy the video, hit that like button. While you're there, be sure to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications for more quality tech videos. Anyways, thanks for watching and I'll see you later.